Good morning, Year 12 ITM, or good day, whatever time of day you're listening to this. Okay, so look, today we're going to have a look at the statement of intent part of the folio. So to do this, we're going to be looking at the page on Canvas under the Design, Management and Communication folio section, which is called Statement of Intent, Video and Scaffold. So essentially what we want to get out of this video is for you to have a really clear understanding of what to include in your statement of intent and why it's an important part of the folio. And it really is. It's the first thing that the markers see. And it also provides scope for what your project's going to look like, how you're going to make it, and kind of justifies why it's an appropriate choice. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at the scaffold here. So I've included a scaffold that kind of, breaks down or explains why the statement of intent is an important part of the folio. But it also provides you a scaffold where you can fill out or answer certain questions and then use that information to form your statement of intent in your folio. So the statement of intent is a crucial part of the industrial technology multimedia folio, as I mentioned earlier. So this is where you explain what you intend on creating for your major design project. So you're outlining what your project's actually going to be. You explain how you intend to create it and why you intend to create it. And we're going to have a look at the marking criteria in a second as well and see why that last part is important. So the why. So as well as this, you're also giving the markers an insight into the kind of detail and thoroughness that your project and folio may have. So you're really setting the tone here for the folio, and this is the first impression the markers get. So if it's really lacking in detail, you're kind of setting it up where you're giving the markers the impression that you don't include much detail. So it's really important to just be impressive right out the gate. So a significant part of your mark does actually come from how closely the completed project relates to what was intended. So when the markers assess this, they look at your project and they look at your statement of intent and they look for, they compare them and they say, does the project actually relate to what was explained in the statement of intent? And, of course, along the way, you can make adjustments as long as they're documented and justified as well. But realistically, once you have an idea for your project, you should stick to it, refine it, and aim to incorporate as many high-level multimedia skills into it as possible. So I've included here an example of a past statement of intent. So this student received a band 5 overall. So it's not exactly the highest mark for a folio or project, but what it is really good for is explaining the kind of information you need to include there. So in your own time, have a read through this, through the statement of intent included here as an example. And then we're going to have a look at the analysis of why it was successful. So the reasons that this was a successful one, or it's a good example of, the kind of qualities to include, is that it's concise. So it gets straight to the point and describes specifically what the student intends to create. So, there's no waffling on, it's not vague. There's a lot of detail there. So it says how many pages are going to be included, how it's, what programs are going to be used, etc. And it also identifies some kind of extensions or options for the project to be extended in some way. And we'll get to that in a second. So the student has also identified considerations for the project, such as the fact that magazines can take the form of both print-based media and online media. So they've, acknowledged the limitations or the options that they have in pursuing the project. And they've kind of also justified why they've made the choices they've made to continue with the project in a certain way. So this is a really important part, justifying the choices we make as well. So the other thing that makes this statement of intent successful, or at least a good example, is that the student clearly identifies what software programs they intend to use. And they also justify why those programs are the most suitable choice. So this is an important part of the kind of setting up the project, where you kind of give the markers a preview of your knowledge of the multimedia industry. What is an industry standard program, and why is that the best choice for your project? And the last bit that's important here is that finally the student identifies what inspired them for this project. So what products in the multimedia world already exist that this student is trying to emulate, or that inspired them in some way. So I've included a scaffold here that will help you write your statement of intent. So for the draft submission, you should still aim to make this as detailed as possible, as if it was your final version. But obviously with the draft submission, I'll give you feedback and you can amend any parts of the statement that could be extended further, or you could provide more detail about. So the scaffold is just here. So once you've come up with your idea for the project, you need to kind of go through this and fill out these sections that kind of answer or respond to these prompts that I've put in here. So I've just included some information as well. Your statement of intent should fit neatly onto one page in your folio. So formatting is very important, and you are actually assigned marks for this in terms of both the draft submission, the final submission, and your external NESA submission. So this, as I said here, this first page kind of sets the tone for the rest of the folio. So make it sharp, really, really design-oriented, aesthetically pleasing, but you also need to include enough detail to describe the direction of your project. So if we move down here, we can have a look at the marking criteria for the statement of intent section of the folio. So you'll see here, and this is for all parts of the section, you're assigned a mark between 1 and 20, 1 obviously being not very successful at all, and 20 being very successful. So you should always be aiming to reach the highest mark range for all sections of your folio. So it's important to look at the language that is used in this criteria and assess your statement of intent against it. So once you think you've finished your statement of intent, have a look at the criteria and see if it does reach or have the qualities of what is, essentially a top mark. And if it doesn't, go back and fix it. So if we have a look at the top mark here, we can see the qualities that are kind of expected of this part of the folio. So for the top mark of statement of intent, statement of intent clarifies the intent of the major project by explaining clearly what is to be achieved and why. So, there's a couple of things to look out for here. So it clarifies the intent. So it gives the marker a preview of what you intend to create. Explaining clearly, and that's a very important word. So it's not vague, it's not ambiguous, it's really, really explicit in providing detail about what the project will look like and why. So that's another important section. So you've justified why it's an appropriate choice as well. So if we have a look at that compared to the next one, you'll see the language changes a little bit. So, the top mark compared to the second top range, it doesn't include that word explaining clearly. So you've explained it, but there is still some questions. If the marker was reading that, they'd say, I've got a pretty good idea, but I'm not 100% sure of some of the details here. So the more detail you can provide, the better. And if we look down to the bottom end, we can see some of the characteristics where it's really lacking in detail. You're essentially what you've done here, and this is a very low mark, by the way, is you've just provided a really vague outline of what you intend to do. and it might not even relate to what the finished product looks like. So essentially what we are doing is we are trying to always aim for the top mark. So it's important to go back to the criteria and self-assess your work against this. So be objective and say, does my work have the qualities of the top range? If not, what can I do to get it there? So I've also included here some important qualities of a successful statement of intent. So read through these, and before you start making your statement of intent, and just familiarize yourself with what the statement of intent is and why it's important, and what kind of qualities you need to include in yours. And finally, I've just included a band 6 folio example, just so you can kind of see the difference between a band 5 and a band 6. So a band 5 is this one here, which is, it's still a very successful statement of intent. But I think what you should do as well is, once you've had a look at that and had a look at the qualities that are included in a statement of intent, come down here and have a look at what a band 6 statement of intent looks like. So the amount of detail, the demonstration of an understanding of the project requirements and limitations, as well as how it could be extended, the motivation behind it, and the justification for why it's an appropriate choice. So I'd highly recommend reading through this and looking at the qualities of what made this one so successful. And you can kind of look at that against both the marking criteria and some of the qualities that I've outlined here as well. But this is a great way of kind of looking at the kind of detail that's involved in that top range. So I hope that's provided you with a bit more scope about what the statement of intent is, why it's important, and how to write a successful one. If you have any questions, of course, let me know. But what you need to do first is read through this page, have a look at the Scaffold document, write your statement of intent, and then we can talk about if there's any ways to improve it from that point. But firstly, what you need to do is have an idea for your project. So if you haven't done that yet, think about what kind of project you're going to pursue for this course.